Elliot, thanks for joining me today in 160 Studios here in Delray Beach.
My pleasure, Joe. Thanks very much for having me down.
Please explain to our audience Inovus Medical. Fascinating. You and I got to spend some time, and as I always do, I like to test drive things. And had a lot of fun yesterday over in the studio. But a little bit about Inovus.
Yeah, so the company itself is in the sector of healthcare simulation and more specifically in surgical simulation. So we design and manufacture surgical training technologies. I'm sure we'll get into how we do that in a little bit. And the business was founded by myself as a clinician and then my co-founder and our CTO, Jordan, who's an engineer.
And so you came through this the hard way. You went to the dark side. You trained, you're an MD.
Correct.
And then you made the move over to entrepreneurism. So tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so it was an interesting journey. So getting into medical school is probably where that journey started. So I was a relatively decent tennis player as a kid. Wasn't really sure what I was going to do when I went to college or university, and got coached into medical school by some very kind surgeons and doctors at my tennis club. And they said, look, you'll go to medical school. If you don't like it, you can always leave medicine. You'll be really employable. So I get to medical school, and this is a kid who was selling sweets in the playground and always had a couple of side hustles. I had like 5 jobs when I was in high school, so I've always had that hustle around me. And I got to medical school and went, you know what, I absolutely love this. This is really great. This is a really fun, really engaging job where we get to meet some amazing people and do some amazing things. And I decided during my time at medical school that surgical training and the surgical career path was going to be for me. And I was looking at, well, how am I going to actually get trained? And I was starting to really gear up my CV ahead of coming out of medical school, and was going to conferences and seeing, well, how do we train our surgeons today? And it was dawning on me that we were very much training our surgeons like we did 100 years ago, 150 years ago, which is that apprenticeship style, see one, do one, teach one, where you're standing next to your senior surgeon. A lot, and really importantly, a lot of the learning curve is on the patients and at the patient bedside. And I looked at that and thought, well, is that how we should be training our surgeons in the modern day? Should we be thinking about maybe moving some of that learning curve away from the patients, especially in the very early stage, and move that into the simulated environment? So started looking at what simulators there were going to be to train me when I came out of medical school and started my surgical training, and realized that there were simulators that existed, but it hadn't got to that point where we'd shifted into that simulated environment. And there were a number of reasons why, once we started looking at it, why that had not happened.
Now, you're an interesting emerging tech company, because while you're a startup, you're one of the unicorns. And I mean unicorn in a startup because you actually make money with one concept. So give us a little baseline about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost as if that's not allowed to happen anymore. And whenever we say it, people chuckle because it's such a rare thing. So yeah, it comes from the genesis of the business. So we founded the business when I was still at medical school. I looked at this and with Jordan, who's the engineering brain behind what we do, and we said, well, actually, the pair of us were selling sweets in the playground before we knew each other. We think that we've got an ability to sell stuff. We definitely know there is a problem we need to solve in a better way. So surely we're the best placed people to do that. These 23-year-old kids with no money, no contacts, no real knowledge, but a lot of hustle about them. So when we started the business, we started off really basic, and we said, we probably can't afford to go to a third-party manufacturer to manufacture the hardware that we wanted to create to solve our problems. And so we decided to become the manufacturer ourselves. That cut out a lot of the middlemen, cut out a lot of the cost for us, and it meant that we could very slowly and methodically build a really vertically integrated operation, which actually was making money along the way. So we were profitable pretty much from day one, and we've remained since we started. So.
As you go, and you've raised some money, and we'll go into that a little bit. But that's got to be a quandary when you talk to VCs, right? Because it doesn't fit into their equation, right? The PE guys maybe, but the VCs are looking at this going, wait, I don't know where to put this in the category, because you're already generating revenue, and your A round, you're probably looking for a lot more than the typical A round, which could be a 2 million slug, but you're already making money and have a pipeline and already are putting in place commercial people.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't fit in that standard mold, and it's really interesting because what we sometimes say to investors when we're speaking with them is, please don't punish us for running our business in the sort of a traditional and what we think is a sensible way, because we've de-risked all of this for you guys. And what we did in that process of running a profitable commercial entity, amazingly, although we've been profitable commercially, a great deal of our focus has been in systems, process, operations, and then technology. So the amazing thing that we've got is it's not just profitable because it's this sort of analog business, it's a widget over here that people will buy and that will tap out. We've got this unbelievable tech platform that sits over the top of it, and that adds even more confusion because then everyone's like, hang on, is this a growth play? Is it a tech play? Well, it's an everything play, which should hopefully make it nice and exciting for them.
Right. I would love to see their faces when you play. And we went into this because I'm an engineer. I was crawling around the box yesterday, and the technology and the camera and the simulation and all the great stuff you've done there, and the models. And a good part of this, you have vertically incorporated 3D printing. So you're able to not have to worry about molds and tooling to the extent others do.
Yeah, absolutely. And to a lot of credit, that goes to my other half, Jordan, who is a super creative guy and will always be a brilliant problem solver as well. So this goes all the way back to when we're building this business with pre-capitalization. So before our very small equity round that we did, we were looking at making these simulators ourselves, and we said, okay, there is only so far we can take laser cutting and CNC milling, and we're going to need some more complex geometries here. And we're in a business that even as we go to scale and sell more and more products globally, we're still never going to be one of those businesses selling tens of millions of units because of the industry that we're in. And we looked into 3D printing and realized, hang on, we can make the capital outlay on a production level printer, which is £250,000. But that's worth 2 injection molds. But we can make an infinite number of parts. And the really cool thing about the 3D printing, sorry, I start geeking out on it when we start talking about the 3D printing, but the cool thing about the type of 3D printing we use, which is SLS printing, so you're basically firing a laser beam through powder in a massive oven, which is full of nitrogen. So it sounds like a pretty dangerous cocktail, and it's pretty dangerous when it comes to what it can do. So you can take larger parts and nest lots of smaller parts in them. So for us as a company, and the product that we've got sitting here today, there's 15 or 16 different parts or SKUs, so sub-SKUs within the assembly that come off that printer, and you can nest most of them into one part. So it's actually for us a really scalable way, and actually allows us to reduce our costs, pass that cost saving onto the end users and the clinicians.
And make your iterations without much angst, because you can change and easily change that versus change tooling, which I know is a wave that we try to avoid.
Exactly, and that makes us super agile. And when it comes to us innovating both on the hardware and the software side, it just puts us in this really strong position. And that hardware and software piece, we dub it Internet of Medical Things, and we have taken the hard road. We decided to go through that vertical integration. So we've got all this manufacturing technology, but because we can manufacture the hardware, we then bring our software engineers in-house, and actually our software and hardware engineers all work together so that you can pull the two technologies together, which is really interesting. And
then, of course, there's a shed.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, the shed in St. Helens. So this comes back to this sort of old school mentality that we've both got to running our business, which is we'd rather run a business that is just providing loads of value to all the stakeholders. So that's, first of all, the patients. That's why we're here. The reason we started this business was looking at, say, how can we improve surgical care through better surgical training? That was number one. So improving things for patients, improving things for the clinicians caring for them, and the whole team that's caring for the patients. And then it comes down all the way to our staff, and then our shareholders and investors and everyone else that's involved in the business. And we view it as one of the ways to do that is not spend all of our money on big shiny offices and boxes and make ourselves feel good about things. It's put ourselves somewhere that's going to do the job and work really well for us, keep our costs low, and then that lets us take those cost savings, plow it back into R&D and innovation, but it also lets us take the cost savings and pass it on to our customers, our end users, which allows us to go to bigger scale.
And I'm looking forward to seeing the shed when I'm out there in December. You were kind enough, I was supposed to be there a couple of weeks ago, and so you got me tickets to Man U and see Ronaldo's first game back with the squad, and I had to cancel the trip. So, but I did ask for a rain ticket for what that's worth. So let's jump into the simulation business. The healthcare medical simulation market's expected to reach $3.4 billion by 2026. And right now it's pegged at 1.7 billion in 2021. That's like a 15% compounding annual growth, right? That is a really high growth category. And it's a scattered category. It's very fragmented. Why is that?
Yeah, so if we look at the history of healthcare simulation in general, that's the market and the segment we're in. So 30 or 40 years ago, the marketplace was maybe 3 or 4 companies. And it was very much focused less on surgical training and surgical simulation, because that goes back to how we're training the surgeons still today, and more focused on things like resuscitation. And so really the sector wasn't a sector before sort of 30 or 40 years ago. And it's in the last 10 years, has started to see this exponential growth. And what that has meant is there's lots of people that come into the sector. It's not quite as stringently regulated as devices. And so that allows quite a lot of people to come into the sector. And for us, it allowed us market entry when we were students, knowing we needed to make a difference, but it let us get our foot in the door, which was great. But what that does mean is there's lots and lots of people coming into the market, and it is becoming more and more fragmented. It will start to mature, we know that, over the coming years, and I think that process is starting now, but that maturity will start turbocharging the growth, because you'll be seeing mature companies aggregating technologies and aggregating other companies and operations that then have an ability to have a bigger impact.
Yeah. And you know, from the top side of tech, I still chuckle. I think VR is overkill for this right now. I don't think it's a economic solution. Sorry, industry, but just calling it what it is. But you use a component of AR and a high fidelity signal and a very amazing, because I played with it yesterday, tactile component to it that VR just doesn't do. So take me into the baseline technology there.
Yeah, and if I can, I'll just take a step back to because it's all about what problem are we solving and how can we solve that problem best. And so we've gone for a problem-first approach rather than a technology-first approach. And so it comes all the way back to that idea of we're training these surgeons in an antiquated way. How can we shift the training continuum into the simulated environment, away from the patients, and protect the patients and their safety a little bit more? And when I was looking at this as a student, and more now over the last few years, we realized there were really 3 key barriers that had stopped that paradigm shift. And those were cost, access, and functionality. So how real are the simulations? So traditionally speaking, and again, VR does have its place for various things, but traditionally speaking, VR technology is very expensive to develop, therefore it's expensive to deploy. It's often quite bulky. The traditional VR platforms are bulky. Therefore, they're not really that portable, not the most accessible. And with VR, we're using software and motors to generate what we call haptics. So how does this feel? Now that's really good for things like turbulence in a plane, that's macroscopic haptics. But when we're looking at simulating microscopic haptics, so how does a blood vessel feel, or how does tissue tension feel, how does this plane of dissection feel, it's really difficult. And so we had the very nice position of hindsight and looking at, well, we know that these technologies are looking to solve these problems and make this paradigm shift. Why has it not happened? Those are the 3 reasons we think. And so that's what drove us. And those are our core values as a business. So developing affordable, accessible, and functional technology. So to actually answer your question, how do we do that? We take the immersive element that you get from VR. So that's computer graphics, so CG generated anatomy, for example. And we take that and we combine it with soft tissue models. So I'm not sure if we can see that, but we take soft tissue models, and this comes back to our vertical integration and the business that we've built, which is a manufacturing business at its core. So we manufacture and design these soft tissue models. They're made from synthetic soft tissue. So instead of having software, motors, and avatar instruments telling you what a tissue should feel like, you actually can put a real instrument into this simulator. And it's also device agnostic, which I'm sure we'll come back to. So you put a real instrument in, you can grab the tissue, you can tension the tissue, you can dissect the tissue, and you're getting what we call real haptics. It's not simulated haptics, it's just real. You're just picking up soft tissue with a real instrument. Now, what we then patented and what we developed is our approach to augmented reality. Another thing for us is making this as realistic as you can for theatre. And in theatre, what we don't do is we don't wear headsets. The surgeon's looking at a screen. And so when people think about augmented reality, they traditionally think, oh, you must be using HoloLens or any other type of headset. And we said, no, that's not the best way to do this. So we designed our own version of of augmented reality. And actually, I'm sorry, I'll bring this back into focus, which really predicates on our patented technology here, which is a way for the real environment and the digital environment to speak to each other. So what we're able to do is when we pick up an effect change in the real environment, the associated digital anatomy, which is overlaid over this, will move with the real product. And when we cause a complication in the real environment, so cut through a blood vessel without having sealed it or ligated it, will trigger a digital bleed. And that communication is patented, and that's what really stands us apart versus the other technology in the space, because we get all of the real haptics that you'd get from a really basic platform, but then we get the immersive engagement that you would get from the VR platform, from the digital overlays. And then the real final piece of that is we've got some really super turbocharged computer vision technology that lets us track all the instruments while they're in play, and then that provides some really rich data and feedback to the training surgeon.
So you have different levels of service or capabilities as well, right? So there's the higher level fidelity signal or experience, and then a lower level fidelity experience. And why is that important to offer into the surgical environment? Again, whether it's an institution, a hospital, the military, teaching institutions, why have you broken down the product that way?
Yeah, so it comes back to that question around the market itself. So what does the market need? Why is it growing at that speed? And the reason being is actually not only surgical training, but a lot of the skills training in healthcare. You can view how we should really be training elite athletes. Tennis is my sport. I like to use tennis as the analogy. And when we think about training for tennis, we don't do the same drills for each of the different strokes. And we actually break them all down. So we'll do forehands cross court, we'll do backhands down the line, we'll do volleys, we'll do serves, and we'll use different drills for that. And then we'll do each of those individually before bringing them together. And the best way to describe why we have so many different platforms take laparoscopic surgery, for an example, is surgeons should be and do train in the same way. There will be certain platforms that are ideal for training a specific skill. So that could be camera navigation, or it could be port entry. Whereas the simulator for training a full procedure, you're not going to have those integrated in the same platform in the same way that you wouldn't have them integrated into the same drill. And so when we looked at this space, we said, okay, not only do we want to take the high fidelity area and bring that into a platform that we think is affordable, accessible, and functional enough to shift the paradigm in the way we train surgeons, but there's loads of stuff that sits below that, which is still really important in the training continuum. And so we should also be a full service provider, so that if you come to Inovus with a surgical training need, be laparoscopic surgery, hysteroscopy, cystoscopy, arthroscopy, etc., we'll have a solution for you.
And you had mentioned also that this platform, while it's for straight up classic straight stick lap, it also easily slides into a robotic play, whether it's on a soft tissue, a Sensus, or a soft tissue, Da Vinci, or any of the other emerging platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a really important piece. So we know that the majority of minimally invasive or laparoscopic surgery is still done with straight stick manual surgery, but we're also well aware that the robotic revolution is coming. And when we think, from our perspective, when we think about robotic surgery and training in robotic surgery, we actually view it, rather than saying people should be practicing robotic surgery, our view is they should be practicing Hugo surgery or Versius surgery or Dexter surgery. Again, there's lots of other platforms available, Da Vinci surgery, because each console is really quite different to the other. And so unlike straight stick, where on the whole, most of the instruments are very similar, you place them into the simulator and away you go, our view is that actually we should have a not only device, but platform agnostic simulator, where the constant is actually the thing in the middle. So it's the box, it's the tissues, it's that training experience, it's the user interface of the simulator. The thing that differs then is the console. And so if I'm going to a center where I need to learn Da Vinci surgery, you can use the Inovus platform, you can use Da Vinci with it, away you go. If I go to a center that's using Versius, same thing. At least there's a constant, almost a safety blanket for the surgeon. And where the added benefit to that is, we see it as being hybrid for years to come, where surgeons will most likely be both robotic and straight stick laparoscopic surgeons. And so again, going down this agnostic approach, so device agnostic, platform agnostic for the robots, means that we can have a single platform and a single simulation experience that the surgeons can have following them around. So I'm going to do my straight stick practice today, tomorrow I'll do my robotic surgery practice, and I'm still on the same platform, same login, data is still there, and it's a similar experience all around.
One of the things that I see that is super successful in any sort of training modality, whether you're a pilot, whether you're a car driver, is the gamification and the UI UX experience of the user. So what have you done to incorporate that into this platform?
Yeah, so a lot of it is driven by our computer vision. So one of the things for us, when we're thinking about it from the surgeon's perspective and when we're learning, if we've got our instruments in the simulator and we're operating, and suddenly we need to gesture to the software or tell the software we need to do something, what we don't want the surgeon to do is take their hands off the instruments and click a button on a keyboard, because same reason why we don't have headsets on our AR, you don't take your hands off the instruments and start clicking keyboards in theatre. It's just not going to happen. So we tried, when we were bringing this technology and developing the technology, we tried to make it as close to that experience as possible. So for example, when you're in the middle of an operation and procedure and something happens, so for example, you start a bleed and there's a bleeding vessel and you want to change instruments out. Now, we have buttons on the screen that allow you to gesture that with the instruments. So you don't take your hands off the instruments, you don't take the instruments out of the simulator, you keep operating, but you are able to tell the software that you're making the right decisions and go through that cognitive learning as much as you're going through the physical learning as well. And that's all powered by our computer vision tech.
And so to date, most surgeons have gotten their experience starting out as a crappy surgeon and then refine their skills at the expense of the patient. I mean, it's not hard to do that math.
Yeah.
Right? So why has it taken so long for simulation and training to get traction in the marketplace? Is it it's such a sort of legacy thinking that that's the way, as the apprentice, you're going to stand next to me, which is not scalable? We're underserved in graduating surgeons. We're trying to democratize surgery and bringing surgery outside of, first world economies. And so why has that been such a challenge or an under sort of penetrated market, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's multifactorial. So there's the traditions, the strong traditions of very traditional subject medicine. And so changing some of those traditions, it just takes time. I mean, I naively thought when we started this business, in 5 years' time, it will be mandated that we have to achieve at least a simulated competency or show competency in a simulated environment before we operate on the patients. We're getting there and we're much closer, and that comes from the way in which we've built the technology. But I think that old antiquated model and tradition is difficult to move. Then we've got really complex systems. And we know that affecting massive change in large systems is difficult. So I think one of the ways to describe this is that fragmentation in the healthcare simulation market. Lots of people will come in and they'll go, we're going to solve this particular area, and then we're going to sell a few bits of kit, not make enough money or not be able to go to scale enough to actually stick around for long enough to have meaningful change. And I actually, specifically in the surgical and healthcare simulation market, I think that's a real big driving factor, is this fragmentation of effort, and no one has gone and said, we're going to take the whole vertical so that there's enough volume for us to keep investing our time and money and effort into the research and development, into the technology, to get it to a point where it is good enough and deemed good enough by the clinicians to say, we can substitute operating on the patients with this, and now we can also say that you're competent and safe because you have achieved a level on that. And I think that's the sort of the journey, and the crux of it is there a technology that's come along where the surgeons are confident to say that's realistic enough to substitute what we know has worked for hundreds of years? It could be better. And I think that's where we're getting to now.
Why haven't the manufacturers, because it makes sense to me from a business model, we're finally getting into an open architecture mentality in health tech. We see it in robotics. You can't possibly solve all the challenges there, whether it's imaging, navigation. But when you think about training, solid training does a number of things. It makes the patient safer. It also drives procedures, because if I can train more surgeons to get to a higher level of competency, they'll use more instrumentation. And if I'm a surgical device company or I'm a robotic company, I don't know if my expertise is building training, right? So why wouldn't I, as a device manufacturer, support a simulation company or a number of simulation companies, not buy them, right? Because it's to the advantage, the more information that you gather per training session on this gets aggregated to inform a database that then continues to level up the surgeons or the aspiring surgeons along the way, and raise everybody's game, and therefore inform device manufacturers as to techniques or even features on a device. So has that come to the conversation yet?
It has, and it's a really exciting piece actually, and that feeds a little bit back into that previous question of why hasn't it been fully adopted? What's been going on there? And we spoke about it being driven by the clinicians, so tradition, and is there something that's viable? The other thing is money. And because traditionally there hasn't been budgets to do this, because it's sort of been a nice to have, the financing of this technology is still not that mature versus the financing of medical device technology. And so the device companies actually are going to play a really important part in this for a number of reasons. One, for the piece that you mentioned there, which is improving their own technology, getting a huge amount of data from the training environment where no one was getting data before. And the great thing about this tech is you don't have to wrap little stickers around the ends of the instruments. You don't have to put fiducial markers on. You stick any instrument you like in there, we'll track it and give you real-time feedback on it. So as they're leveraging that, what the device companies are starting to do as well is say, well, you know what, we're spending a lot of money on professional education. Why don't we go for the best-in-class professional education? And one of the approaches that we take at Inovus is to act as that really important middleman. So when you look at our segmentation of our market, device companies are very important and growing a huge amount. But we also work closely with the colleges, the societies, the hospitals, the residency programs. And as that middleman, understanding what all the conversations are, we view it as our job to say, look guys, you as a residency program, you've got enough capital or enough budget to get to 70% of where you want to be for ideal training. We also know that device companies over here are investing X amount in exactly the same platform. Why don't we bring the conversation together and start leveraging people's investments so that the value add and the ROI, most importantly for the patient, is even better. So it's spot on. It's a piece that in the UK I think we've done very well, and I think globally as we start expanding, that's going to be something we're going to really focus on.
So touching on the UK, I've watched again for the last few years the number of technologies coming out from the UK has been, in relative terms, a dramatic increase. You know, you've got certainly CMR, you've got Proximy, you've got Quanta, you've got many companies now coming out as tech companies. Classically, UK, especially the Ireland side of things, has been known as great manufacturing, skilled labor, injection molding. But again, coming out of Cambridge, Oxford, London area, and I'm sorry if I'm leaving some people off, but the tech coming out of there, in my 30 years, I've not seen this ramp up. Why do you think that's happening?
Don't forget St. Helens.
St. Helens.
mustn't forget that.
And I have to shout out Newcastle because we have property there
absolutely.
with TMG. So.
Yeah, and we were talking about the importance of geographical arbitrage, I think, previously,
right.
And St. Helens and Newcastle are really good exponents of that. There is lots of talent in Oxford, Cambridge, and London, undoubtedly, but there is a lot of talent in the north of the UK and some of these other cities and towns around there. We tap into that talent, and that's the first answer to the question. Why is that? I just think right now I think we just seem to be in a rich vein of form with lots of very talented people who actually are more motivated to spend their talents in an area where they feel like they're actually having a massive impact on people's lives and giving an ROI. So some of our engineers, for example, could quite easily be going working for much, much bigger companies, but they feel that they're having a bigger impact by working with us and seeing this tangible change. And they get to see all these numbers of these simulated procedures that are going on and thinking, well, look at how much people are improving their skill. The impact that's having on patients is huge. So I think the talent pool of today at the moment, especially in the UK, are looking for that bigger meaning behind what they're doing. And that means as med tech, which is traditionally slower and it's not that same pace as your traditional tech, we're able to attract more talent in. I think you've then got this incredible ecosystem in the UK at the moment of clinician, and I would say this because I am one of them, so I'm a bit biased, but of these clinician founders and these clinician entrepreneurs who are looking at these problems and going, right, I'm not going to wait for someone else to solve this. I'm not going to wait for the business people to solve this. I'll just become the business person. I'll become the change maker. And then we've got a really nice ecosystem of support in the UK for that. So we've got one of the biggest health tech accelerators in the world, which is the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, which Inovus have come out of, Proximy have come out of, Touch Surgery have come out of. And that ecosystem and support of the clinicians, where they're empowering us to say, okay, guys, instead of us trying to steal all your IP or hold on to all your IP and throttle any innovation, and instead of making it really difficult because we're not going to let you have a flexible working pattern, we're going to take the reins off and let's see what happens. And now we're starting to see the product of that approach, and I think it's a really exciting time to be in the UK.
Yeah, no doubt. And historically, you know, US has been known as the playland or playground of entrepreneurs. It's a little more conservative in England than it is here. There's more cowboys here. But again, I'm watching these entrepreneurs come out of, you know, the UK now, and it's fantastic to watch them unleash it and all the brains that are in that Oxford, Cambridge area and the rest of the country. But the university in those areas
Absolutely.
is good. So what didn't I ask you that we should talk about the technology, the platform, and the market?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, I mean, you get to see it in front of you here, there's three elements to our technology, really. There's the hardware, which we've spoken about, and the where we managed to position ourselves is it took us a long time to get to the point where we could understand how to put all these bits of hardware together such that we could then build some software with it. So we've got the hardware piece, I think we've touched on that. We've got what we call the native application, which you've seen, which is the simulations being performed. It lets the surgeon experience that simulated environment. But I think the piece we didn't touch on is this idea of connected surgical training. And the modern day surgeon is not the surgeon that was even 30 years ago. And there's a piece that I really like that we're having an impact with our simulators, and it comes to the third piece. So hardware, software number one is the what we call a native application, so simulation, and the third piece is our web application. So it's a web application. You can get it anywhere that you've got a Wi-Fi signal, and that allows you to log in, and it's effectively our learning management system which runs everything. So there you can connect with your senior surgeon. You can have tasks set for you by your senior surgeon. You can record live recordings of what you're doing in your simulated environment at home from anywhere in the world and send that to your senior surgeon, who can then review it. They can provide some timestamp feedback. They can sign you off with an OSAT. They can then say, okay, look, you're competent there. Let's set you the next 4 or 5 tasks. And it keeps going round and round and managing that. Now, where this gets really exciting is the piece of kit here. That works with the laptop, an off-the-shelf laptop. No headsets required. Not necessarily a super-powered gaming PC, which is another drawback to the VR stuff. You do need really powerful computers. And we can send these out into the homes of anyone. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, Elliot's going to start talking about COVID, which I am. And so last year when COVID happened, our traditional approach to training surgeons fell over because they're not allowed to stand next to each other. And there are a couple of things that happened. So the surgeons got redeployed into like the proning teams and all the other teams that were important to provide ancillary care to the efforts against COVID. So not only were they not operating and learning in the traditional way, they lost contact with their senior surgeon, who's that support mechanism for them to learn. And they didn't see them for a year. And so what we were finding is we were able to send these systems out into people's homes, and although they weren't seeing their surgeon, they were still having contact because they were doing a simulated procedure, they were sending it to their consultant or their attending or their professor, and that professor was able to provide feedback and say, you know what, you did this really well, but here are areas that you can improve on. And that connectivity is not just a COVID thing. Mm-hmm. I mentioned on it briefly, I'll come back to it, which is the modern day surgeon is so different to what it was. And what we have been finding, and we collect feedback from every course that we run, we have been finding more and more female surgeons who are on maternity leave, where their primary piece of feedback to us is, you've completely revolutionized my training continuum because I'm on maternity leave and I can still keep my practical skills up. So when I come back, I'm not going to have lost ground to my peers. And for us, that's super powerful. And that sort of impact that we're having is getting us really excited because now we're saying, well, this is what we've been talking about. The modern surgeon needs a different way of training. It's not saying completely replace the old-fashioned way. It's saying augment that, supplement it, and improve it so that we can improve things for the patients, improve things for the trainees.
Mm. And that's interesting because it fits into the model of everything else we're doing, right? So I don't need to be there to have an impact. Right? So we see that with telehealth. We see that with telerobotics. We see that with home health care. We see that with telehealth, again, from the home or even bedside in the hospital, is I can still have a massive impact, but it's going now from an analog 1v1 to one to many.
Correct.
And fitting into the lifestyle as well. Because again, I can connect and get a response and get feedback on my mobile if I had it with me. It's amazing it's not connected to me with an umbilical cord, but that's super important. So you're going through financing right now. What are your plans? The financing comes in. Where's the expansion? What should people be looking for if they want to get in contact with you and the team? What does the marching orders over the next 6, 12, 18 months look like?
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things we've done is that patient urgency that we talk about. So we've very patiently and urgently built a really strong operating business with great underlying tech systems process, and the majority of our commercial activities in the UK. We're a great UK commercial team. The one downside to the brilliant industry that we're in is there's quite a long sales cycle, of course. So for us, we're raising capital so that we can expand our commercial reach and really start spreading the impact that we're having. So we're raising capital primarily to build a US commercial team, but we're also making sure that the pipeline of our technology is able to keep pace with that commercial team. So it's an exciting time because we've got a business that's profitable, growing, that's very much de-risked for investors, but that has this massive runway for further growth. So commercial expansion in the US, followed by commercial expansion in Europe, and the whole time feeding that with a pipeline of new products and coming down into not just the soft tissue simulation, but into things like orthopedics, spine, neuro, all these various categories in our product horizontal. In terms of contact, I'm the point man, so I'm not sure if I say my email here, we can put it up.
Put it right on the screen.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, so that's my email address. Please feel free to reach out if you're. And the important thing for us is we're looking for investors that will share our passion and our dream, but bring some added value to what we're doing, especially with the focus of the US, because I'm finding that I knew it was a big place, but Florida is basically the size of our entire domestic market in the UK, so that sort of puts into perspective the challenge we've got ahead of us. So,
bigger ocean to boil, but it sounds like based on the stats that I see, based on the way that training in general is going in education, because I see it in all of our clients, even the small emerging tech, are starting to bring the training and development role much earlier into, because it drives ongoing adoption utilization, right? So if we get more effective way to teach, whether it's sales team or the end user, the better for the entire industry. Well, Elliot, I appreciate your time and coming into 160 Studios, and enjoy Florida, enjoy the US, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Thanks very much for having me.
You got it.
Cheers.
This is Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.